Thank you.
Okay, yes, thanks. First of all, I want to present Professor Taraborrelli, who was also very kind for accepting my invitation with a short notice. She is associate professor at the University of Cagliari, where she teaches institutions of political philosophy, and history of theories of cosmopolitanism. She has devoted 3 volumes to the theme of cosmopolitanism, Dal Cittadino del mondo al mondo dei cittadini, Saggio su Kant, which is from the citizen of the world to the world of citizens, essay on Kant, contemporary cosmopolitanism, Arendt and Cosmopolitanism, state, community, words in common, which we are now has been published in Italian, but which is issuing in English next year for those.
Yes, for Bloomsbury. I signed last week the contract. Yeah, I'm very happy.
She works from a cosmopolitan perspective on democracy, human rights, and migrations, and in particular on the theme of the integration of migrants in the European societies. She is on the editorial and scientific board of several journals in the field, and she founded and directs the series of studies on cosmopolitanism, l'albero delle direzioni. Currently, she is member of the team of the research project, The Rule of Law, Crisis and Democratic Backsliding in the European Union. And moreover, she is a member of the Italian Society of Political Philosophy, the Italian Society for Critical Thinking, the Italian Society of Kantian Studies, the Kantian Political Thought Standing Group, and as an expert, member of the national delegation of the Program Committee of Horizon Europe. The theme of our discussion today is Taraborrelli's cosmopolitan reading of Hannah Arendt, which she develops starting from the topic of the issue of stateless persons and migrants, which in Arendt's perspective opens a space beyond international law, and which has been law among states, has boiled down to the relationship among states. In her reading, Taraborrelli suggests that even if Arendt does not systematically address the notion of cosmopolitanism, this notion and the fundamental idea in her thought. So I'm going to start with the first question. Also, I want to tell to the fellowship that we are to the fellows that we are having 45 minutes or a half hour. Therefore, I try to be very brief. Concerning the first question, I would rather address the theme of the stateless persons and the refugees. Remarkably, Arendt underlines that these people who were no more citizens found themselves or still find themselves in the condition of not having an authority which might guarantee their human rights. From Arendt's perspective, this grounds on the groundlessness, on the theoretical mistake at the basis of the universalism of the Declaration of the Human Rights, but also on the problem of the weakness of the nation system, of the nation-state system. Indeed, this system implies that if someone is no more citizen of his state, he is no more even a human, since humanity is a family of nations. Therefore, I was asking if you could deepen this topic also in the perception, also from the viewpoint of what you have studied.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me and everybody. Okay, I'll try to answer your question in 15 minutes, 20 minutes for the focus. Okay, is that correct? Okay, in 1937, Arendt was deprived of her German citizenship as a consequence of the Nuremberg laws 1935. From that moment, she was stateless until she obtained the American citizenship in 1951. Her relief for becoming an American citizen is expressed concisely, but with intense and moving words in a letter sent to her first husband, and where she says, "I've got a passport, the most beautiful book, the passport." Arendt describes the condition of statelessness in the We Refugees, a sorrowful autobiographic essay published in 1943. We refugees, she writes, lost our home, which means the familiarity and daily life. We lost our occupation, which means the confidence that we are of some use in this world. We lost our language, which means the naturalness of reactions, the simplicity of gestures, the unaffected expression of feelings. In the origins of totalitarianism, Arendt goes back to the problem of statelessness and stateless people as a mass phenomenon from a broader historical political perspective. She does so in a chapter tellingly titled "The Decline of Nation States and the End of the Rights of Man." It is important to point it out that differently from what is conventionally thought, Arendt does not criticize human rights as such, but rather the fact that they have never been philosophically established and politically secured. In their traditional form, she claims, they lost all validity. In order to interpret her words correctly, it is essential to hold fast to the actual target of her critique. As long as human rights were deemed inalienable, irreducible, indeductible from other rights of laws and grounded in human nature as such, no authority was invoked for their establishment. And yet, man, who was their source and stood as an entity emancipated from any authority and constraint, who carried his dignity within himself, eventually turned into a mere member of a people. It was then, Arendt writes, that the two questions of human rights and national emancipation met. I quote, "Only the emancipated sovereignty of the people, of one's own people, seemed to be able to ensure them. The dangerous consequences of the identification of rights of man and rights of people in the European nation-state system came to light when it became clear that this traditional conception of human rights was unable to protect the basic rights of entire ethnic groups, as well as of the stateless people." I quote, "The rights of man, after all, have been defined as inalienable because they were supposed to be independent of all governments. But it turned out that the moment human beings lacked their own government and had to fall back upon their minimum rights, no authority was left to protect them, and no institution was willing to guarantee them. So the loss of membership in the national state came with the loss of not some, but all rights. The state of nature as a condition preceding civil society, once just a mental experiment of contractualist thinkers, tragically materialized all around the stateless people. In the original state of nature, however, there were neither rights supposedly attached to its inhabitants by virtue of their humanity, nor external authorities legally obligated to guarantee them. The failure of human rights, thus conceived, was determined precisely by their proven inapplicability to the state people, even in countries whose constitutions were based upon them. The doubts about the so-called human rights did not only concern their applicability, but also their definition. Arendt observes that among the drafters of the new Charter of Human Rights, approved and proclaimed on December 10, 1948, hardly anyone was able to give a clear definition of what these general human rights, as distinguished from the rights of citizens, really are. In fact, although everyone agreed that the tragedy of stateless people lied in their loss of all rights of men, no one seems to know which rights they lost when they lost these human rights. Hence, the need for Hannah Arendt to understand their real substance. And in order to do so, Arendt reconstructs the chain of deprivation suffered by the stateless people until she is finally able to pin down the essential right of which they were stripped, the ultimate right whose loss uniquely characterized their condition. In the first place, the stateless people were deprived of a home country. Secondly, the rightless lose government protection, and the laws of government protection leaves the stateless people in a worse condition than the enemy aliens and even than criminals. The former still benefit from the protection of their countries, while the latter are considered within penal codes. Unlike the stateless people, they are not entirely outside the realm of law and the state of nature imagined by contractualists' thinker. The stateless people have thus lost their homes, government protection, and the rights traditionally called human, which were factually proven as nothing more than civil and political rights. Nonetheless, Arendt writes, these losses are still insufficient for us to grasp what the rightless were essentially deprived of, that primary loss which determined the negation of all their rights. The soldier during the war is deprived of his right to life, the criminal of his right to freedom, all citizens during an emergency of their right to the pursuit of happiness, but they certainly do not lose all their rights. The difference from the stateless people lies in the fact that the soldier, the criminal, and the citizens during emergencies lose some rights while remaining citizens. They still hold rights as a member of national states. Those rights, as Arendt explains, outline the forms of social coexistence and the limits of power, that is, they solve problems within a given community. The stateless people lose something more essential than the rights of the citizen. They lose citizenship, and with it, membership in any community whatsoever. They lose, in other words, what Arendt famously condenses in the controversial formula, the right to have rights. They lose all their rights because they lose that one, the only right that Arendt is ready to call human and to claim for all human beings. This is a right to live in a system of relationships, or, she says, in a framework where one is judged by one's actions and opinions, or a right to belong to some kind of organized community. Finally, she says, a right to belong to humanity. The right to have rights is thus identified with the right to have a distinct place in the world and a political, not only legal, status. A loss of right to have rights results in a condition of dependency, impotence, uprootedness, and irrelevance. Along with this, the loss of the right to have rights bears an even more serious consequence: the exclusion from humanity. It seems that, she says, a man who is nothing but a man, and who should, according to the implications of the inborn inalienable rights of man, come under exactly the situation for which the declaration of such general rights provided, actually loses the qualities and specific relations by virtue of which other people are capable of treating and recognizing him as a fellow human. And this condition, as we know, was a death sentence. The mass phenomenon of statelessness has exposed the limitations of the sovereign nation state, which has betrayed its mission to guarantee the equality of its members, and at the same time has given rise to a system of international organization that has failed to protect stateless people, but rather has excluded them completely from the family of nations. As a matter of fact, the only tools available for cases of statelessness, the right of asylum and naturalization, were ineffective. The appeal to the right of asylum cannot help them. No administrative system is practically able to handle the required procedures for granting the thousands of people a right designed for exceptional cases. And what is more, insofar as the right of asylum was customary accorded only to whom was forced to leave her country due to political or religious beliefs, the new exiles were not entitled to it. They, says Arendt, were persecuted not because of what they had done or taught, but because of what they unchangeably were, born into the wrong kind of race or the wrong kind of class. The new stateless people were exiles due to nature or accident, something for which they were not responsible and which they did not have the power to change. They were innocent, and just for this reason, they could not apply for asylum. In a globalized world, the exclusion from closed communities, the national states, determined an expulsion from humanity. But, as she writes in a note some years after the publication of The Origins of Totalitarianism, the exclusion from humanity does not mean that it has been, as it has been sometimes thought, that the excluded are no longer human, but that they, she says, with respect to their legal status, will no longer be human. That is, they will have no place within humanity. I hope to have answered your question.
I'm sorry. Yes, now I have the second question, and then we can open the discussion. In your book, you also propose, you underline that Arendt sketches a new form of government, which, from her perspective, might enact the participatory attitude of man, but also include sometimes excluded people, and also which could create something like a concrete universality, a globe which connects men through state and local institutions. This hypothesis of Arendt results from her rejection of the principle of sovereignty and also of the perspective of a worldly state. My answer is why, in your perspective, does Arendt fear the two options of sovereignty and worldly state, and how federalism and councilism could contrast these two perspectives?
Okay, it's a complex question, and okay, I'll try to answer it in 15, 20 minutes, 20 minutes perhaps. Okay, is that okay? In the preface to the first edition of The Origins of Totalitarianism, we find these following words that I consider the cosmopolitan manifesto of Hannah Arendt. And she says, anti-Semitism, not merely the hatred of Jews, imperialism, not merely conquest, totalitarianism, not merely dictatorship, one after the other, one more brutally than the other, have demonstrated that human dignity needs a new guarantee, which can be found only in a new political principle that I think it's plurality, in a new law on earth, whose validity this time must comprehend the whole of humanity, while its power must remain strictly limited, rooted in and controlled by newly defined territorial entities. So that's why, according to me, it's not just the right to have rights, it's not just the right to belong to a nation state, but the right to belong to a more complex system based on these newly defined territorial entities. And that is the task of an Arendt thought about this problem, okay? So Arendt neither took the nation state as a given, nor as a Syllabel claims, nor did she leave unanswered the question of which kind of framework, structure, or community is required in order for the right to be guaranteed. Not only does she harshly criticize the nation state as a form organization of the peoples, she also attempts to outline an alternative conception of political structure or community, and thus of international organization in a cosmopolitan direction. For Arendt, the stateless people should not be understood as an anomaly within a system of European nation states, or due just to overpopulation or lack of space, but to the European political institutional organization, the nation state, and the international order it produced, the Westphalia model of international relations, and in particular to its two essential features, nationality and sovereignty. The limits of the nation-state principle became dramatically evident as long as, she says, the constitutionally guaranteed legal protection of the state and the laws governing the country quite obviously did not apply to all residents in the territory, but only to those who belong to the nation organization itself. This situation unambiguously revealed that nationalism had prevailed and that the state had been transformed from an instrument of the law into an instrument of the nation. The conditions of rightness and lawlessness inflicted upon the stateless people shook the nation state at its roots, for the very egalitarian principle inspiring its conception has been betrayed. As Arendt very eloquently puts it, the nation state cannot exist once its principle of equality before the law has broken down. As a possible alternative to the nation state principle, Arendt is it is not a solution, it's an hope. Arendt suggests the federal principle. She encourages the creation of a form of political organization that favors the cohesence of the different nations as equals, in the belief that federal systems offer better chances for success in the resolution of national conflicts and provide a stronger basis for the development of a public space where the people, the different peoples, can organize and reorganize themselves politically. In order to better understand her project, however, a clarification is necessary. By the term federation, Arendt means a specific political structure rather than a mere union of traditional nation states, such as the old alliances of or the systems of national blocs. The nation states, whether united or not, would be ill-equipped for solving conflicts between majority and minorities. Rather, a true federation, or one that Arendt regards as such, is made up of different, clearly identifiable nationalities or other political elements that together form a state. All in a similar context, national conflicts can be solved because the unsolvable minority-majority problem has ceased or should have ceased to exist. Even conceding that federalism were an effective antidote to nationalism, capable of minimizing or eliminating the problem of minorities, and supposing that the state succeeded in rising above the nation, one more obstacle should be removed in order to secure the right to have rights. That is, the idea of absolute sovereignty, both internal and external, which lies at the heart of modern state. Arendt criticizes the traditional conception of state sovereignty for its proven paradoxical inability to protect its very own citizens. For Arendt, the problem of the stateless people is entirely unsolvable in a world of sovereign nations. As we saw, she defends the federal principle due to its greater ability to curb nationalism and to the model of peaceful coexistence among different nationalities it offers. However, such principle plays an even more critical role within Arendt's political theory. It is the linchpin of her effort to elaborate an alternative conception of state or territorial entity in which sovereignty, traditionally understood, is eliminated, or at least internally and externally limited within the relationships with other states. Sovereignty can be generally defined as a political legal concept meant to indicate the ultimate power to command within a political society and consequently to differentiate the latter from other human associations, the organization of which lacks such as supreme, exclusive, and underived power. Arendt calls into question some of the dogmatic elements of this concept. That power is essentially organized hierarchically, that sovereignty is the supreme power to command, that sovereignty has an exclusive and non-derivative nature, that is, it is original, indivisible, and uncommunicable. This concept of sovereignty, in her view, was produced by the misplaced association of sovereignty and the conception of freedom as a free will, the phenomenon of will experienced in solitude and made possible by self-control. Such conception of freedom had a religious origin and was subsequently recast in philosophical terms. And rather than rediscovering political freedom as experienced in the Greek polis, political philosophers, starting from Baudin, Grotius, and Hobbes, transposed the theological philosophical model of internal freedom into the political realm. For Arendt, in the political sphere, the most deleterious consequence of the philosophical equation of freedom and free will was the identification of freedom with sovereignty, conducive either to a denial of human freedom, namely, if it is realized that whatever men may be, they are never sovereign, or to the insight that the freedom of one man or a group or a body politic can be purchased only at the price of the freedom, the sovereignty of all others. This identification lies at the origin of the concept of freedom, sovereignty as command and control, which assumes that a person is free to the extent that he is able to subjugate anyone and anything within her purview of her will, self-determination. A political theory that adopts this concept and that deems plausible the analogy between free sovereign person and free sovereign state will also readily agree with the following. Just like a person is free sovereign if she has exclusive control over herself, she fully masters her own desires and is unimpeded by external interference, so too a state is a free sovereign if it exercises exclusive control over its own territory and is unaffected by external interference over its domestic sphere. And this concept of freedom and sovereignty rests upon the belief that a person and the state can be free in the absence of others, individual states or people. It thus denies the centrality of the principle of plurality to politics and the original experience of freedom as concerted action among equals. Arendt proposes as alternative a federal state as a way to abolish the traditional concept of internal freedom sovereignty by virtue of the constitutionalization of the principle of the separation of powers, but interpret as the foundation of a plurality of centers of power, that is, the establishment of federated republics functioning as mutually checking centers of power. Such acts augment rather than decrease power. Therefore, federalism represents not only the main road out of the problem of nationalism and minorities, but also a way of conceiving of power that stands in opposition to the traditional paradigm of freedom sovereignty, connected with the idea of supremacy, of an entity placed on the top of a hierarchical ranking, which can hold and exercise power only at the expense of other powers, along the lines of a model of political order informed by an authoritarian centralizing principle. But essential to this federated system of federal political units is the fact that they are united through a certain kind of contract, which Arendt defines a mutual contract based on reciprocity, on mutual engagement and equality. And it's different from the contract by consent deriving from Hobbes and Hobbesian tradition. Its practical content is a promise, and its outcome is a society or a co-association. Subscribing this kind of contract, the various federal territorial units could join together and form increasingly larger federations, up to the creation of cosmopolitan system of relationships. The territorial units would be tied to each other, not by a common will of sorts, but rather by an agreed purpose for which alone the promises are valid and binding, within a political structure in which they can check each other's powers without losing it. At this federal, sorry, I have to skip because okay, in sum, in her view, neither a system of national sovereign states nor a world authority or a top-down paternalistic legal reformation would be able to guarantee the right to have rights and the dignity and right attached to it. In other words, none of the solutions discussed keeps the promise of offering and protecting a meaningful membership to free and equal individual. Building upon this consideration, Arendt points toward an alternative project, which I call cosmopolitan system of relationships, made up of federations of political, federal, but also council units. In fact, this federal system by itself is insufficient to avoid a vital danger for Arendt, namely the powerlessness of citizens in the face of political and bureaucratic institutions, federal or otherwise. Only joint political action among individuals prevents imbalances and centralization that are lethal to human freedom and the condition of plurality. Therefore, the various federated centers of power must be managed by actively participating councils of citizens on various levels, according to an idea of a large democracy, a combination of direct democracy in which residents experience public happiness and representative democracy in which they elect for the councils of successive levels their representatives. This is the federal consular system, conciliar system at the heart of the cosmopolitan system of relations. In this context, the right to have rights is guaranteed by the mutual promise among world political entities to always ensure that all individuals enjoy citizenship and participation in some center of power. In this horizontal redistribution of power, the only vertical elements are the permanent international court and the international criminal code. In fact, Arendt gives humanity as a political actor two responsibilities that we might call cosmopolitan: the defense of the right to be entitled and the punishment of crimes against humanity. And I will answer your question about her skepticism toward world states, perhaps in the Q&A session, Letizia. Sorry.
Okay. I don't know how should we proceed. Maybe we could collect the other questions, and so maybe if there are similar questions, it is easier to answer. My answer, but my question, which might also be taken for maybe a little too time, a little too much, concerns maybe the influence of Kant's project for eternal peace on this perspective of Arendt. Besides from what you underline very clearly in your book, that is the fact that Arendt's reading of Kant as promoting a worldly citizenship through the idea of the larger mentality. I think that maybe also there is influence of the idea of eternal peace, of the project for eternal peace. But I leave room also for the others, so that if there are some questions. Yes, feel free to pose your question, Javier. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Taraborrelli, for your presentation, for your answers to Letizia. I have two questions because it seems to me Arendt moves between different lines of argumentation, and I would like to know your approach to that. I mean, this line on or this argument on the right to have rights is very famous, and I think it's explained itself. On the other hand, I just how to reconcile, Hannah Arendt, she comes also like from the phenomenological tradition also, and this seems to be developing a legal tradition, like the tradition of Kant, as it was said, of Kelsen, and it's proposing an argument that comes from this normative tradition on what to do on a state level. This is a completely different approach than, for example, from the phenomenological school of Adolf Reinach, who proposed like how to think about what is, I mean, the law or the legal system out of the relations between persons, and not out of like a legal structure. And what does that mean? No. So this is my first question, like how to deal on that side, like thinking that this argument comes from a kind of a normative tradition. And my second question, you were talking about federalism and how to produce balances between majorities and minorities, for example, and they are supposed to balance each other, respect each other, like you have to recognize, acknowledge the other. Everything is, in that sense, I think it's very, very clear. But then Arendt produced also this text on the Reflections on Little Rock, where a minority was criticized because they were kind of, in many words, in the words of the time, they were segregating, and they were, in that sense, being racist. And she opposed, Arendt opposed the ruling of the Supreme Court saying they should open up. But if they were kind of checking each other out, like if imbalances in this federalism, how does that come into the picture? Because then that would be precisely what the Supreme Court was trying to do, was like, okay, there is a problem in this community or in this, if we expand that, there can be a problem in different entities, different bodies, and they should check out each other out. But then she kind of defends the sovereignty of this minority to rule themselves without the balances of the other bodies. So that would be my question, how to think about these different lines of thought that Arendt is producing.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe if there are no other questions, so we could leave room to Professor. I don't know. Yes, I think maybe Professor, you can feel free.
Allora, as regards the question about the relationship and the influence of Kant on Arendt. Okay, as you know, Arendt was strongly influenced by Kant, and sorry, I'm looking for some quotation. Okay. Okay, Arendt, okay, strong influenced, but also she was familiar with Kant's critics, and the evidence is obviously the lectures on Kant's critic of judgment you are referring to. In this lecture, in which she analyzes the critic of judgment and try to give a political interpretation of critical judgment, there are many references to the essay Perpetual Peace, and she, for instance, relates the critical thinking with the right to visit explicitly, when she says that the critical thinking, while still a solitary business, does not cut itself off from all others. And and she said that to think with an enlarged mentality means that one trains one's imagination to go visiting. And in brackets, she writes, compare the right to visit of the third definitive article of Perpetual Peace. And then she emphasized Kant's ambivalence toward war in her relation between the actor's judgment and the spectator's judgments. And she also shares Kant's distrust about the establishment of a single world state, a world federation. As you know, in second definitive article, Kant gives two options in order to establish a peaceful condition. And the one is the Völkerbund, the other one is the Völkerstaat. And interpreters are divided regarding the interpretation to give to what is the Kant's ideal. Is the Völkerstaat or is the Völkerbund? And Karl Jaspers has given an interpretation which implies that Kant's ideal should have been the world state or a federation of states. And Hannah Arendt distrusts this solution, and she says that that this she interprets the Kantian ideal in a different way. From her perspective, the ideal could be realized in a universal, she says, government of men. And she clarifies that this means not a world state. And you can find this in her notebook, 1973. And so, yes, I think that she developed Kant's theory of political peace and his idea of cosmopolitanism in two senses. First of all, developing this idea of enlarged mentality that should be the point of view of the citizen of the world, but also of the actor in a community. And the other hand is this idea of federalism, which means a federalism weak and that maintains the value of the plurality of states. States reconceived in a way I try to describe here today.
Thanks.
Okay, if I understand you, thanks for your question. Yes, it could be weird interpret Arendt as a philosopher who gives or interprets or views political philosophy in a normative way. And but first of all, what I tried to do was to reconstruct a possible political theory of Hannah Arendt in cosmopolitan, and to try to give sense to her political philosophy from a cosmopolitan perspective. And so try to put Hannah Arendt among the tradition of cosmopolitanists, and from the other way, to stress that the idea of cosmopolitanism in Hannah Arendt is an horizontal idea of cosmopolitanism and not a verticalist idea of cosmopolitanism. And she, okay, it depends on, and then she tried also to put together and to stress the importance of rights and politics. So she doesn't consider the appeal to the right the only key, the only solution in order to guarantee the right to have right. In fact, the idea that we have to form federal conciliar units means that the moment of or the part that the politics have to play, it's important, and it's I mean, I think it's fundamental in order to guarantee the right to have right. She doesn't consider sufficient neither the Declaration of Human Rights, neither just the a juridical, political new organization of international relation. What is fundamental in her view is the political participation. Democracy, it's the very and participation, it's the very possibility to guarantee the right to have right to people.
I think,
And,
I don't know if we have still time. I see another question by Mikhail, but I don't know if we still have time. Professor, if you have to leave, I don't know.
5 minutes, sorry.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the lecture. And my question is very quick because I'm from the educational background, and
Sorry, from?
it's from educational background.
Okay,
Like
okay.
I was teaching at school, I was teaching at university, and my question is about the views of Hannah Arendt and that the concept of education in cosmopolitan perspective, and what about education of stateless persons? Is it possible? Because we know that education is one of the main tools for the state, for the national state, to make new citizens, to basically to produce new citizens.
Yes, in fact, I would like to write an article, an essay on Arendt and education, and education for the, because at the end of my book, I raised the question about is it possible to be citizen of the world, and what does it mean to be citizen of the world, provided that they belonging to a community, whatever conceived, it's important. And so I try to demonstrate that we have a different way of being citizens of the world, living in a state. And one of the most important thing is this capability of developing the solidarity, and to feel the duty to protect the world, meaning the physical world, but also the world in common we have developed, and the world in common we would like to develop with others, and the condition of possibility of this cosmopolitan attitude is the development of the large mentality. And so the capability of put yourself in from the point of view of the others, and be able to reach an impartial point of view, which take in consideration also the points of view of others. And in order to be able to do this, you have to be educated. And I think that today the only place where we can know each other and share different points of view, cultures, backgrounds, it's school. So school is today the real and at the core of the possibility of form a citizen of the world belonging to some community. And Hannah Arendt provides some hints about this, and I would like to develop these hints and these suggestions by Hannah Arendt. But important is try to stay to, okay, also the idea of a democracy, a conciliar democracy, a participatory democracy, means that you have to, with your body, meet others. And so I would be open to the idea to give everybody, also children, the possibility to participate in councils, in arena where they can discuss, deliberate, and can also make decisions together with others at different levels on different issues and topics, in order to be trained to become citizens of a state, and then to express a political vote when you are 18s or 20s. Or so it's both educational and practical, according, if we want to develop Hannah Arendt suggestions.
Thank you very much. It was also very interesting. And
I haven't answered Dmitry Drobnikov
I didn't
questions, but sorry, I will write an email if I may and answer the question. Okay, Dmitry, do you hear me? No,
Yes, I hear, but I didn't ask the question actually.
No, so it's your other, Javier Toscano, sorry. Javier Toscano, I will email you and answer your questions, okay? It's very, very interesting and okay, I feel challenged by your questions, so I will answer you as soon as possible, but by mail, okay?
Thank you, yes.
Thank you very much again to all of you, to Professor, and to those who post questions.
Thank you, Letizia. Thank you, Professor Taraborrelli. Also, you see how dynamic things can become. So you're most welcome to join us during our other seminars on other topics. It's very much transdisciplinary, but I promise, and through Letizia, because I'm also, I did some things on Arendt, and I cooperate with the center of Hannah Arendt Center in Padova. So yes,
in Verona,
yeah, Verona, yes, and then yes,
we will meet in June at Verona.
Yes, yes,
I will come too.
Yes, and there is a lot of common grounds for future exchange.
Yes, sure. I will be definitely happy and sorry for this short Q&A.
No, it's wonderful. Thank you for your time.
Okay, so see you soon,
yes.
and have a great day and career.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thanks.